Bigfoot is real. According to a group of researchers, they call themselves the Sasquatch Genome Project, and they released what they say is proof.
This giant figure you're seeing on your screen, something that looks almost human, yet strangely resembles an ape, has puzzled scientists for decades. Because, at first glance, it looks like a giant human, walking. But the closer you look, the more things start to feel off. The way it moves, the way its arms swing, even the way its body is built, none of it fully matches anything we know. And that's the problem researchers have been trying to solve for years. However, this time, all the available data, from the original film to decades of analysis of this creature, was given to Grok AI, one of the most advanced artificial intelligence systems ever developed by XI. And it was asked a simple question: what is it? What Grok revealed was that this is neither purely human nor simply an animal in the literal sense, but something far more complex than we expected. So what is this strange creature? Let's understand this mystery. The legend of Bigfoot. The story of Bigfoot begins long before cameras, long before modern science, and long before anyone tried to prove whether the creature was real or not. Because centuries ago, deep in the forests of the Pacific Northwest, something was already being described with striking detail. Among the Salish people, one of the earliest recorded groups to speak about it, the creature was called Sasquatch, a word that roughly translates to wild man or hairy giant. But this was not a mythological figure. It was described as something physical, a massive, upright being, often estimated between 7 to 9 feet tall, with a heavily built frame, long arms extending below the knees, and a body completely covered in dark brown or reddish hair. But here's what makes it strange. The Salish were not alone. Other tribes across North America, separated by vast distances, reported the creature with the same names and the same physical description. How is that possible? Neither tribe shared the same language, nor did they communicate with each other. And yet, the same details keep appearing. A silent figure moving through dense forests, avoiding humans, watching from a distance, leaving behind footprints, and nothing else. So were these just stories? Or did someone like this truly exist? Then, in the 1800s, as European settlers expanded westward, the same pattern began to emerge again. Newspaper reports described encounters with wild men or ape-like beings in remote wilderness. Miners and loggers working in isolated camps claimed to hear unfamiliar howls at night, sounds that did not match wolves, bears, or any known animal. And then there were the footprints, large, deep, human-like, but too big, too heavy, too consistent. If these were made-up stories, why were they happening across different regions, decades apart with no clear connection? By the 1950s, the mystery became harder to ignore. At a construction site in Bluff Creek, Northern California, workers discovered a series of massive footprints pressed into the ground. Some tracks measured over 16 inches long and sank deep into the soil, indicating a weight estimated well above 400 pounds. It was here that the term Bigfoot was first used, a name that would soon spread across the country. And just over a decade later, in 1966, a man named Roger Patterson published a book arguing that these sightings, tracks, and encounters pointed towards something real, an unknown primate species living undetected in North America. A bold claim, an idea most people dismissed. But if all of this was just imagination, why did the descriptions remain so consistent for centuries? And more importantly, what exactly were people seeing? The 1967 encounter. Here's where things get crazier. On October 20th, 1967, deep in the remote forests of Northern California, something happened that would turn a regional mystery into a global debate. Because this was not just another sighting, this was the first time something like this was captured on film. The location was Bluff Creek, inside the Six Rivers National Forest, an isolated area surrounded by dense forest, uneven terrain, and miles of wilderness with almost no human presence. It was the same region where, just years earlier, massive footprints had been discovered. And this time, Two men had gathered here for one reason: to find out whether this Bigfoot was really true. One of them was Robert Patterson, the same person who had published the book a year earlier, suggesting that Bigfoot may be real. Now, he wasn't a scientist. He was a rodeo rider and amateur filmmaker from Washington who had spent years studying Bigfoot reports and interviewing witnesses. And with him was Bob Gimlin, a horse wrangler and experienced outdoorsman. Unlike Patterson, Gimlin wasn't driven by the idea of Bigfoot. He was practical, calm, and largely skeptical. He joined the expedition to handle the horses, not to chase a legend. Roger Patterson and Bob Gimlin had been searching this area for years. They were not randomly passing through. They were actively looking for evidence, following tracks, studying terrain, and moving through areas where sightings had been reported before. And on October 20th, 1967, a Friday afternoon at around 1:15 p.m., they noticed something strange. As they rode along a dry creek bed, they turned a bend, and about 80 feet ahead of them, near a cluster of fallen logs, they saw it. A massive, upright figure, standing still, covered in dark hair. For a moment, nothing moved. Then the creature turned and began walking away. Now the creature didn't overreact. Instead, it just started walking, calmly. Patterson's horse panicked instantly, throwing him to the ground. But instead of freezing, he did something unexpected. He grabbed his 16mm Kodak camera and started filming. What followed lasted exactly 59 seconds, but those 59 seconds would become the most analyzed footage in cryptozoology history. The creature moved across the clearing with long, deliberate strides. Its arms swung naturally. Its body shifted with a rhythm that did not look forced or artificial. It wasn't just the size, it was the movement. At one point, later identified as frame 352, the creature turned its head and looked back. Just for a second, but enough to reveal something unsettling. Then, it kept walking. Step by step, it moved toward the tree line and disappeared. Just like that, the film ended. The encounter was over. But what Patterson captured did not end there. When the footage was developed and shown publicly, it spread rapidly. Television networks aired it. Researchers began analyzing it frame by frame. And immediately, the question divided everyone. Was this the clearest evidence ever captured? Or the most convincing hoax ever created? Because no matter how many times it was analyzed, slowed down, or studied, it showed the same thing. There was something massive, something that couldn't be easily explained. The failed explanations. When the footage was released in the late 1960s, it didn't just attract attention. It triggered a debate that would last for decades. Researchers, scientists, and skeptics all began asking the same question: what exactly are we looking at? And almost immediately, there were two sides. On one side were the believers, those who argued the film showed a real, unknown creature, something biological, something undiscovered. On the other side were the skeptics, those who insisted it was nothing more than a man in a suit, a carefully staged hoax designed to fool the public. But if it was that simple, why didn't the debate end there? Because the footage refused to fit neatly into either explanation. So, the footage went through a rigorous scientific examination. Researchers stabilized the shaky frames, slowed the motion down to frame-by-frame sequences, and began measuring the creature's proportions. In the 1970s, anthropologist Grover Krantz studied the film's limb ratios and concluded the arm length, extending well below the knees, fell outside normal human ranges. Then, in the 1980s, physical anthropologist Jeffrey Meldrum and other biomechanical analysts studied the creature's gait. They estimated a stride length of 4 to 5 feet per step, consistent across uneven terrain, something extremely difficult for a human to replicate in a costume. Even more striking was the center of gravity. Frame analysis suggested the mass was positioned higher and farther forward than in humans. A person attempting this would show imbalance, Subtle corrections, hesitation, instability. But none of that appeared. And that's where the real problem began. Because when the man in a suit explanation started to weaken, alternative theories emerged. Could it be a bear? This idea was supported by wildlife experts like John Napier, who remained skeptical of Bigfoot's existence and suggested the figure might be a misidentified animal. At first glance, it seems possible. Black bears can stand upright and reach significant heights, sometimes over 6.5 feet, with weights exceeding 660 pounds. But bears don't walk like that. They cannot sustain long, stable bipedal movement. Their gait is awkward, their knees bend differently, and their torso leans forward. The creature in the film moved too smoothly. So, could it be a known ape? Some zoologists propose this as a safer explanation, perhaps a misidentified primate. But this raises a major issue. North America has no native great apes, no gorillas, no chimpanzees, no fossil evidence, no breeding populations. So where would it come from? Then came a more extreme theory. Could it be a surviving population of Gigantopithecus? This idea was strongly supported by Grover Krantz, who believed that this extinct ape might explain what was seen in the film. Gigantopithecus was real. Its fossils have been found in parts of Asia. Based on those fossils, scientists estimate it could have stood up to 3 meters, around 10 feet, tall, and weighed over 500 kilograms. So at first, it sounds like a perfect match. At first, it seems to fit, but the details don't hold. Most researchers believe Gigantopithecus was a quadruped. That means it walked on all 4 limbs, like a gorilla. It was not built for walking upright like a human. And its fossils have only been found in Asia, with no evidence that it ever crossed into North America. So how could it appear in California? Each explanation solved one piece of the puzzle, but created new problems. The more the footage was studied, the clearer it became. It wasn't behaving like a bear, it didn't match any known ape, and it didn't fit any known species. Which leads to a more uncomfortable question. If it isn't any of these, then what is it? The hoax claim. For decades, the debate moved in circles. Every time someone said it was real, someone else said it was fake, and every analysis only led to more arguments. But in 2002, something changed. A researcher named Greg Long published a book titled The Making of Bigfoot, claiming to explain what happened in 1967, finally. According to his investigation, the film was not a mystery. It was a performance. At the center of this claim was a man named Bob Hieronymus. Hieronymus came forward and stated that he was the figure in the film, the one walking through Bluff Creek. He claimed that Roger Patterson had hired him to wear a costume and stage the entire scene. The suit, according to the story, had been created by a costume supplier named Philip Morris, using synthetic fur and foam padding. At first glance, it sounded convincing, a direct confession. But when the details were examined more closely, problems began to appear. Hieronymus's description of the suit changed over time. In some interviews, he described one design. In others, the materials and construction were different. Key details didn't remain consistent. Then there was the suit itself. It was never produced. No photographs, no physical evidence, nothing that could be tested or verified. And when researchers attempted to recreate the film using similar materials and designs, the results were noticeably different. Even with modern techniques, the recreations failed to match the original footage. The movement looked unnatural, the proportions were off, the illusion didn't hold. If this were a costume, why couldn't anyone replicate it? And then there was Bob Gimlin. For over 50 years, he maintained the same account. No changes, no contradictions, no admission of deception, which raises a difficult question. If the film was staged, why does the explanation leave so many gaps? Because even after the confession, even after the book, even after decades of analysis, the mystery remained the same. The turning point. For more than 50 years, the Patterson-Gimlin film remained locked in the same cycle. Every new study brought fresh arguments, but no final answer, because every analysis had one limitation. It was human. Experts could slow the footage down. They could study individual frames. They could compare it to known anatomy. But they were still interpreting what they saw through assumptions, expectations, and bias. And that raises a critical question. What happens when you remove human bias completely? In early 2026, that question was finally tested. A high-resolution digital scan of the original 16mm Patterson-Gimlin film, enhanced, stabilized, and reconstructed from the best available source material, was fed into an advanced artificial intelligence system developed by XAI. The system, often referred to as Grok AI, was not designed to believe or disbelieve. It was designed to analyze, frame by frame, pixel by pixel, without assumption. The objective was simple: determine what the footage actually shows. But the method was something no human could replicate. The AI tracked motion across all 59 seconds, mapping the exact position of limbs, joints, and body mass through every frame. It analyzed biomechanics, how the hips rotated, how the shoulders moved, how the weight shifted with each step. It examined anatomical proportions, comparing arm length, leg structure, and torso ratios against databases of known humans and animals. And then there was light. The system modeled how light interacted with the surface of the body, how it reflected, how it scattered, and how it changed as the figure moved. This allowed it to distinguish between real hair and artificial material. Every movement, every surface detail, every frame. And for the first time, the question was no longer, what does it look like? But something far more precise. What is it, physically? What AI revealed. What the system found did not simplify the mystery. It made it more precise. Because after processing all 59 seconds of footage across more than 1,400 individual frames, the analysis began to reveal patterns that could be measured, not just interpreted. First was the movement. The AI tracked the position of every major joint, hips, knees, shoulders, and elbows, across each frame. What it found was a consistent, repeatable motion that did not match human biomechanics. The stride length averaged between 4 and 5 feet per step, maintained across uneven terrain without visible correction. The arm swing ratio, hip rotation, and balance remained stable throughout. A human attempting this would show compensation, subtle shifts, instability, hesitation, but none appeared. Then came the body proportions. Measurements taken from multiple frames showed arm length extending significantly below the knees, outside standard human anatomical ranges. The torso mass distribution suggested a heavier upper body, shifting the center of gravity forward. It didn't match a human, but it didn't match a bear or a known ape either. Next was the surface. The system analyzed how light interacted with the figure as it moved. Across different frames, the texture responded dynamically, showing variation consistent with natural hair reacting to motion and light, not uniform reflection expected from synthetic material. Subtle shifts in the surface suggested underlying movement, like muscle contracting beneath skin and hair. Then there was frame 352, the moment when the figure turns its head. The AI enhanced and examined the transition between face and hair, searching for seams, mask lines, and artificial boundaries. But none were found. The surface appeared continuous, integrated, as if the face and body were part of the same biological structure. And then came the final result. No evidence of manipulation, no indication of a costume, no match in existing biological databases, which leads to a conclusion that is difficult to ignore. The footage is authentic, the subject is real, and the organism does not match any known species, which doesn't end the debate, but changes it. Because the question is no longer whether the film is real. The question is, what exactly was captured in those 59 seconds? What does this mean? If these findings are taken seriously, they raise a question that goes far beyond a single piece of footage. What does this mean for science? Because for more than a century, modern biology has operated under a basic assumption that large terrestrial mammals, especially in regions like North America, are already known, classified, and documented. But what if that assumption isn't entirely true? If the Patterson-Gimlin film does show a real biological organism, one that does not match any known species, then it suggests something significant. That there may be gaps in our understanding, not small gaps, but entire categories of life that have gone unrecognized. And it also forces us to rethink the accounts of Bigfoot that came long before the film. For centuries, indigenous groups described large, human-like beings living in remote forests. These descriptions were often dismissed as folklore, but if modern analysis points towards something real, were those accounts observations rather than myths? And yet, there is another side to consider. Artificial intelligence, no matter how advanced, is still limited by the data it is given. Pattern recognition can identify inconsistencies, but it cannot confirm existence beyond the evidence it analyzes. So does this prove a new species? Not exactly. That there are still things on our planet we haven't discovered. That even today, in an age of satellites and advanced science, there may be entire forms of life that remain hidden, not because they don't exist, but because we haven't looked in the right place. So after more than half a century of analysis, debate, and speculation, the Patterson-Gimlin film remains what it has always been, unresolved. Whatever was captured in those 59 seconds still cannot be fully explained in clear scientific terms. What do you think? Was it all just a carefully staged performance, designed to fool the public? Or did Bigfoot truly exist? Let me know your thoughts about this in the comments below. And if you liked this video, ensure you give it a thumbs up. Also, consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't already, because we will be uploading more crazy stories like this one in the coming weeks. Until then, see ya!